the carbon ledge. They sold the world a future, a cleaner economy, a chance to fix what industry had broken. And for a time, people believed them. This is the story of Solstice Global Energy, how a company's carbon ledger became the most dangerous book in modern finance. When Solstice Global Energy announced its IPO in 2027, the offering was framed as a civic achievement. The company was built from acquisitions, startup battery firms, ocean carbon sequestration projects, a handful of high-profile renewable utilities. Solstice's CEO, Daniel Mercer, cultivated the image of a Silicon Valley environmentalist with the swagger of a Wall Street dealmaker. He walked climate summits and dinner tables with equal ease. On stage, he would say, "Green is the next gold," and investors rewarded him. Solstice's stock climbed, its green bonds were oversubscribed. Universities and municipal pension funds rushed in. The PR made it feel like investing in the future. There was, however, a quieter machine humming behind the marketing, a sprawling compliance department, a specialized ESG metrics team, and an internal data pipeline that fed performance dashboards to regulators and auditors. Those dashboards showed what everyone wanted to see: falling emissions, rising carbon credits, projects that verified more offset tons than any competitor. But the public dashboards were only the beginning of the narrative. The real story lived in a hidden ledger, payments labeled as community resilience, carbon verification services, project uplift. They added up to billions, and no one outside Solstice knew where those billions actually went. She wasn't supposed to be important. Nina Alvarez was a mid-level accounts controller, quiet, precise, late nights, cup of black coffee, the kind of person who notices when numbers drift by a decimal point. Nina worked in Solstice's Houston finance hub. She reconciled vendor payables and stamped invoices for approval. In the spring of 2029, she pulled a reconciliation for 3 community grant projects in West Africa. The cash disbursements were large, dozens of millions, but the corresponding vendor names looked like jokes. Green Fence Solutions, Blue Canopy Trust, Harbor Light Consulting. The addresses were mailbox services. She dug a little deeper. The verification certificates for the carbon credits showed the same signer across different countries, often with the same tiny typo in the verifier name. That typo, one extra S in a verifier's name, was Nina's first breadcrumb. She ran a search, pulled a few PDFs, and cross-checked with public registries. The verifier was real, but the certificate serials were recycled and backdated. The satellite feed images in Solstice's donor portal, the shiny images used in investor decks, were composites. Nina's training in controls told her this was not sloppy bookkeeping. It smelled like an engineered narrative. She raised her concern. The Treasury team told her to escalate. The Treasury manager suggested creative timing explained fluctuations. Her direct supervisor warned, "Don't poke the sleeping dog." Nina did what quiet people do when silence is no longer an option. She pulled relevant files into an encrypted folder and sent them anonymously to a federal tip line used for environmental finance fraud. Soon after, someone removed her system access. An HR note labeled restructuring terminated her role quietly, but the US Attorney's Office had already read the files. Nina's tip landed with the Environmental and Financial Crimes Unit inside the U.S. Department of Justice. They assigned Jonah Pierce, a forensic accountant who had cut his teeth on frauds that hid inside energy projects and public contracts. Jonah assembled a small soft target team, a blockchain analyst, a satellite imagery specialist, 2 forensic auditors, and an international legal attaché. Their first step was simple: replicate the reconciliation Nina had done, but do it more widely. They pulled Solstice's public filings and its ESG audit reports, and they subpoenaed internal records. The company protested. Solstice's lawyers called the probe an invasion and said the firm would cooperate to a reasonable extent. Politically sensitive donors urged calm. Jonah's technique was old law and new tech. Start with bank ledgers and swift traces, layer in chain of custody of digital evidence, then triangulate with non-financial data, satellite imagery of sites, telecom logs from project managers, and metadata from the company's verification PDFs. Within 3 weeks, they saw the same pattern across continents. Payments were routed through a lattice of shell corporations registered in low transparency jurisdictions. The same small group of verification firms issued certificates across unrelated projects, and the same set of escrow accounts in a single Swiss private bank held flows from half a dozen Solstice projects. Those flows did not end in community programs. They folded back into the Solstice corporate family through a series of seemingly legitimate consulting retainers and technology licensing agreements. From there, funds were used to buy up small political consulting firms in the US and to seed a dark web of influence campaigns. Jonah drew a diagram, arrows and nodes, path and return. Where Solstice's balance sheet showed a donation, their forensics showed a circuit. Money left the operating subsidiaries and, via shell companies and verifier firms, financed PR campaigns and political donations that later helped secure regulatory exemptions. The circle looked engineered. The critical breakthrough came when the team subpoenaed the ledger of one verifier, a Luxembourg consultancy called Very Green S. On paper, Very Green certified dozens of offset projects across Africa and Southeast Asia. In reality, Very Green existed only as an email alias and a virtual office in a tech park. Inside Very Green's ledger, the investigators found a table of carbon credit serials, thousands of entries, and a curious field, project proof hash. The hash should point to a document, a GPS shipping manifest, a satellite date stamp, or a field engineer's signed report. But the hashes were cryptographic placeholders that pointed to nothing in any public chain. A blockchain analyst reversed some hashes and found they resolved to images stored on a private cloud controlled by a Solstice subsidiary. Those images were photo composites, cropped photos of unrelated landscapes with false timestamps embedded. Project reports stated that trees were conserved, wells were dug, methane capture systems were installed. But satellite comparison showed the locations never changed in years. To be certain, Jonah's satellite analyst overlaid historical imagery. Regions labeled project area showed no new infrastructure, no reforestation, no carbon capture installations. Yet Solstice booked offsets, investors bought credits, regulators accepted the certificates. Investors had, in essence, purchased an accounting fiction. Across the voluntary carbon market, this was a ruinous fact. If one large seller floods the market with unverifiable credits, the price of legitimate credits collapses and buyer trust vanishes. Governments and market watchers had been warning about such systemic risks. Weaving that into the operation turned the scheme from corporate misrepresentation to a financial contagion. Tracing the money was less glamorous than it sounded. The payments moved fast and in small increments, microtransfers that avoided large red flags. The shell companies had obviously studied detection algorithms. The DOJ team brought in a seasoned offshore forensic specialist who said only one thing: this is an old playbook with new code. A single chain might look like this. Solstice's West Africa subsidiary pays Blue Canopy Limited, a Cypriot entity, for project mobilization. Blue Canopy pays EcoServe Trust in the Cayman Islands for community engagement. EcoServe pays a Delaware LLC for technology licensing. That Delaware LLC then remits funds to a consulting trust in Switzerland. which disperses in the U. S to political consultants and social media engagement startups. The money that left an island as a community grant returned as a campaign modestly labeled policy enablement. Jonah's team found that the architecture repeatedly used a small number of intermediaries: 2 law firms, 3 trust companies, and 1 private bank. Those intermediaries took fees, large ones. The fees masked the real beneficiaries. Behind the beneficiaries were officer accounts with ties, through a sequence of signatories, to an executive family trust that benefited Daniel Mercer's inner circle. At one point, the team discovered wire advice notes confirming that a $12 million transfer for eco-verification had been directed to a company registered in Delaware under the name Seabright Holdings LLC, a company traced to Mercer's brother-in-law. When confronted later in court filings, Solstice's lawyers called the expenses legitimate vendor relationships. The private bank refused to release client names, citing secrecy laws. It became a fight of law versus ledger. The investigation deepened when Dr. Priya Raman, a former Solstice data scientist, reached out. Priya had been responsible for building Solstice's ESG analytics platform, the predictive model that extrapolated partial field readings into projected emissions reductions. Her first message was succinct: they knew how to fool it. Priya explained the mechanism. Solstice's analysts trained a model on a small set of real field sensor readings. The model would then generate projections for complete projects, filling the gaps where on-the-ground sensors didn't exist. Managers loved the output because it showed huge gains. Priya called it synthetic reporting. Plausible data computed where measured data did not exist. When she refused to adjust the model to increase forecasted carbon removals, Priya said her employment was terminated for reorganization. She had kept a copy of the original model and, with DOJ approval, provided it to Jonah's team. The model logs showed a pattern of manual overrides after 2027 and usernames linked to Solstice's sustainability office. Priya's testimony tied the narrative strands together: the photo composites, the tokenized hashes with missing proof, the financial flows. The ESG numbers had been fabricated at the model layer, and the finances simply followed. As the DOJ filed its first subpoenas, the public tide began to change. Headlines called it the carbon con and greenwashing on a grand scale. Daniel Mercer's spokespeople called the allegations selective leaks, and the company produced a PR blitz, cleaned footage, on-the-ground volunteers, staged community farms. They hired a crisis management firm and launched a campaign to question the credibility of anonymous insiders. Then politics entered. Solstice's affiliates had funded policy efforts and think tanks that lobbied in favor of looser carbon credit verification standards. Several senators who had accepted speaking fees found their names dragged into hearings. The lobbying created a high-pressure political wall around Solstice. For prosecutors, the work was now not only forensic, it was adversarial at the highest levels. There were threats to people on both sides. Priya received anonymous messages warning her to go silent. Nina, the original tipster, received late-night visits and a suspicious vehicle following her on the highway. Protecting witnesses became a DOJ priority. Still, testimony from 2 internal contractors finally delivered explosive confirmation. Verifier certificates had been backdated after payments were issued. A clear sign the paperwork followed the money, not the other way around. The case turned public in earnest when the Ledger report published an exclusive with leaked visualizations that Jonah had provided under court seal. An animated map showing money leaving Ghana, routing through Cyprus and the Caymans, and returning as political donations. The animation made it impossible for any public official to shrug. A cascade occurred quickly. Global institutional investors withdrew their funds. the SEC launched a parallel securities fraud inquiry. International development banks retracted grants. Local suppliers in Africa, small contractors who had waited months for funds, found their payment wires cancelled. The human cost suddenly made the story visceral. In closed sessions, Solstice's lawyers attempted to negotiate, offering repayments, revised audits, and board resignations. Mercer resisted. When a deposition surfaced, an internal audio in which Mercer told a senior executive to make the metrics pretty so the headlines stay pretty, the tone of the case changed. Prosecutors would argue that the phrase evidenced intent. The federal case opened in a crowded courtroom. Prosecutors presented a dense case: forensic bank records, satellite imagery, the Priya model logs, and Nina's encrypted folder. The lead prosecutor played a reconstructed audit process in court. Multiple screens showing a single carbon credit, appearing in different projects on different continents. Solstice's defense argued complexity. They claimed voluntary carbon markets were messy, verification standards evolving, and that any discrepancies were industry growing pains. They pointed to a big-name auditing firm that had once signed off on Solstice's public reports. That firm faced furious questioning. Why had it failed to detect synthetic reporting? Defense counsel blamed corporate deception and rogue actors inside Solstice. Forensic testimony from Jonah was granular and devastating. He walked jurors through swift messages, showed how microtransfers hid aggregate flows, and explained how tokenized hashes pointed to empty files. He called it an architecture of plausible denial. When the evidentiary record showed Solstice's charitable arms distributing small community grants after the company received large investor money, more as theater than as relief, the public's anger turned to moral revulsion. After 6 months of testimony and cross-examination, the jury deliberated. The verdict: guilty on counts of securities fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. Daniel Mercer was sentenced to 40 years. Several executives received long terms. The private bank that refused cooperation negotiated a heavy civil penalty. The so-called verifier companies dissolved. The offshore trusts seized assets worth billions. The Solstice case didn't end with prison terms. It sparked a reform wave. The SEC revised ESG disclosure rules. Congress created task forces to oversee voluntary carbon markets. Policymakers pushed for registries that require immutable proof of real-world carbon reductions, a response to the way photos and fabricated certificates had passed for verification. Audit firms tightened their carbon due diligence. Rating agencies reworked methodologies, and some investors, chastened and expensive lessons learned, created their own verification squads to vet future sustainability investments. For the communities affected by false grants, the recovery was slow. Some funds were repatriated, most were not. The moral damage to trust in markets, to donors who had hoped to help, lingered. Years later, in a small federal archive, you can still find the raw logs that started this story. A folder of emails, a set of cryptographic hashes, a few photos of empty fields with fake timestamps. They're modest files, but they started a movement to make ESG data auditable and verifiable. On a rainy November morning, Jonah Pierce stood before a graduate class and said, quietly, "We solved one fraud, but we didn't end the hunger for shortcuts. Fraud evolves with technology. Our job is to evolve faster." And somewhere, Nina Alvarez started a non-profit that taught local auditors in developing countries how to verify satellite imagery and read metadata. She never took the spotlight. She said simply, "If you build the world, you should be able to show the world you built it." Moral and call to action. In the end, the carbon ledger wasn't just about one company's greed. It was about a world too eager to believe in easy virtue. Behind every polished report, every sustainability award, and every green promise, there must be truth backed by accountability. When we stop questioning what we're told, corruption grows roots in the soil of good intentions. The lesson is clear. Numbers don't lie, but the people who manipulate them do. Forensic auditors, investigative journalists, and ordinary citizens share one duty: to demand transparency where power prefers silence. Because the next scandal won't announce itself, it will hide, as this one did in the ledgers we never bothered to read. Stay alert, follow the money, and never mistake marketing for morality.